Good morning and welcome to City Hall. We'll get started with our invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Father Constantine Nasser is here from St. Elijah Orthodox Christian Church. He'll lead us in the invocation. Afterwards, I'll ask Councilman Sam Bowman to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please stand?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Let us pray. O Lord our God, who created us and brought us into the life of this city, and who has shown us the way of salvation, gracious Lord, bestow upon our mayor, our city council, and all who labor in behalf of our city and this community, the revelation of your heavenly mysteries. Be mindful, O Lord, for your servants here present and those who are absent from among us. Grant to all, O Lord, the wisdom of Solomon, the dignity of Moses, the courage of David, the love of Peter, the conversion of Paul, the conviction of Stephen, and the humility of the publican. Illumine our hearts with the light to discern what is good and beneficial for our city. Open our minds to understand the individual needs and points of view of others. May we be firm in our points of view and gentle when we disagree. Be mindful, O Lord, of our city in which we dwell, and every city and countryside around us. Be mindful of those who travel by sea, by land, by air, for the sick and the suffering, the captives, the poor, our armed forces, and all who bear fruit and do good works in this holy, for the glory of God, for this city and our state and our nation. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're on item 4 of the council agenda. Entertain a motion for item A and B. This is to receive the Journal of Council Proceedings for March 8th and to approve the Journal of Council Proceedings for March 1st. We have a motion and a second on item 4. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 5 is request for uncontested continuances.
Mayor, there's a couple this morning on page 8 under item 8D1. 8D1, item B, 3049 South Medill Boulevard. We ask that that be stricken. We need to re-notified. And then under item 8E1A, 6209 South Land Avenue. We ask that that be stricken. We'll rework for additional violations. And item D, 801 Southeast 33rd Street. We ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured.
Are there any other requests for uncontested continuances? We'll recess the council meeting, convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. There's one item. Comments or questions on the MFA? All right, cast your votes. Passes unanimously. We'll adjourn the OCMFA, convene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority. One item. We have a motion and a second on the PPA. Any comments or questions on this item? All right, cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Adjourn OCPPA and convene as the Oklahoma City Environmental Assistance Trust. There's one item. Motion and a second on the EAT. Any comments or questions on this? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We'll adjourn the OCEAT, reconvene the council meeting with a consent docket. All right, are there any individual considerations? Looks like we have 26 items on the consent docket.
Your Honor, I have a question about uniform.
Item U?
Yes.
All right. Did you say item U, Pat?
Yes,
okay.
6U, sir.
Gotcha. Anybody else?
Mayor, on item R, there's a release of a permanent easement, and there's some issues with that, and that should be stricken. That's item 6R.
Okay, so item R is stricken from the record.
I have a question on P.
All right. Pat, you want to go ahead and get your question on U?
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a paving project between the City of Yukon, Oklahoma Department of Transportation, and the City of Oklahoma City to do some highway improvements out in the western part of Ward 8. And I was curious as to when it would be anticipated that funding would be available so we can go ahead with this project?
As the item says, it's dependent on funding, and we don't have any funding identified for this at this time. What our obligations would be when we do have funding available would be to pay for our part of the engineering fee, and to pay for 20% of the utility relocation, and to pay for right-of-way acquisition. The first part of that would be to pay for the design. So we would either need to fund that through the MFA. That's probably where it would need to come from, but we don't have that funding identified yet.
You think, Dennis, it might be in the next bond issue, next GO bond issue, that far out, or are you hopeful that we might be able to find some money in the interim?
No, I think we could get to it before then.
Okay. And our partners in this are willing to stand by and wait for us to do that? There won't be any a chance that we would lose ODOT's participation because of the delay?
No, I don't believe there will be.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Skip, you wanted to ask a
Dennis.
question about item P?
Yes, but Dennis, while you're here, or if you need some time on O,
On O?
yes.
Uh-huh.
One of the bridges that have been a consistent concern with some of the citizens that live off of Grand Boulevard, the bridge off of MLK and Grand, has that been completed in reference to all the rehabilitation issues there? I think the north side of the bridge, or the south side of the bridge collapsed, and then right after they did the repairs there, I think they started having problems with the north side of the bridge.
My understanding is that everything's been completed on that.
It has, okay. And so this bridge at Hiawassee, is it now completed, or?
Yes, that work has been completed.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the consent docket?
I think P comes from is with the Parks Department, Mayor.
Okay.
Councilman, I might be able to respond to your question on P. I'll give it a whirl anyway.
Okay, as it relates to the landscape issue of the parks,
Well, maybe I can't give it a whirl. I'm sure Wendell will be able to answer that for you.
okay.
Wendell, Skip had a question on item P.
Yes, sir.
And this relates to what the actual work will be as it relates in reference to the landscape. I see that this has been amended for that purpose, specifically for landscaping issues.
On which park, sir?
Well, it's in reference to Woodson Park, but the locations, all the parks, the Douglas, Edwards, Southern Oaks.
Yes, sir. Each of those parks is part of this project and will receive some work. Of course, the Douglas Park we're referring to there is on Northwest.
It's on 47th, I understand that, but Edwards Park is in Ward 7, and so.
Yes, sir. That is yes, sir. Edwards is the park where we're converting softball fields to football, soccer fields.
Okay. So the landscape architect issue as it relates to Edwards Park, is that just to connect the lighting at the park?
No, sir. That at Edwards, the design issue there was the redesign of the athletic fields. You had asked us a few days ago if we had plans for landscaping in that park, and I believe it was related to the issue of part of the trail being still being limestone screenings, and we are working with the new bond issue, the 07 bond issue funds, which will allow us to finalize the paving all the way around on that trail.
Okay, so this will ultimately complete the trail around Edwards Park.
Not this project, sir, no. This project only relates to the conversion of those athletic fields. But we have a future project that will allow us to complete that trail.
Do you know how
That's a
long?
paved trail.
Do you know how long that project will be as far as the time frame before we can get the completion of the trails around the park?
We're doing planning on that now, and I should be able to have an answer for you in about a week as to when we'll be able to finalize that trail.
Okay.
Of course, the trail does go all the way around now, sir, as you
I know,
probably
but-
know, but
Part of it is not paved.
there is a section of it that's limestone screenings, yes, sir.
Yes. And with this, what is going to be the major change as it relates to the fields that's already there? I mean, is it just putting in the backstops and the bleachers for the Little League football?
They'll be reconfigured. Backstops that are there now will come down because it'll be football and soccer, and the fields will be realigned.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Wendell.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Sam?
While we're on this, Wendell, the two parks, Douglas Park and Swaddick, are the improvements, soccer field improvements in both? both
Douglas
those parks?
Park on, pardon me, sir, are we finished? Douglas Park on 47th Street is a backstop, a new backstop, and you said Swaddick, it's also a backstop.
Backstops.
Yes, sir.
Larry?
Yeah, on Woodson, Wendell, you're going to convert some of those baseball fields into soccer, football fields?
Yes, sir, and it's a total redo of that athletic field complex on the east side of the interstate there, yes, sir.
And what's the rough time frame on that?
We'll be finished by end of summer,
Thank you, sir.
probably earlier.
Wendell?
Yes, sir.
One last question. Do you think the time has come that at Edwards Park that the entry into the park off of Bryant, where I guess for security purposes or crowd control at one time, they laid the rebar down the middle and put those rubber stoppers down one lane and put the sign up that you could only go in one way on Sundays? You know, all of that has been, for the most part, disassembled, and now you have metal rods just sticking up out of the street. And I drive through the park, and I don't see any major issues as it relates to crowd control. People tend to be there for exactly what the park is for, and that is fishing and having family outings. And it just seems so trashy, for short of a better word. And is it time that we could look at that and remove all that metal out of the park so people can come in with a free flow of lanes without having to worry about their car rolling over one of those rebars that's sticking out of the ground?
You're speaking of the plastic sections that are in the middle of the Park Road, I believe.
The few plastic that's left there, most of it now, it's metal just sticking up. I mean,
Okay.
that plastic has cracked and it's falling apart, and most of that lane is just metal rebar sticking up.
Well-
And even if it was plastic, it just seems like I don't think there's another park in Oklahoma City that's a line like that.
That was done, as you had already mentioned, a number of years ago because we were having crowd control problems primarily on Sundays, occasionally on Saturdays, and I don't believe we've had that problem for quite some time. I'd be glad to consult with the police chief and see if he's comfortable to remove those. If he is, I certainly am.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, any other comments or questions on the consent docket? We have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. On to the concurrence docket where there's just one item. All right, cast your votes on the concurrence docket. Passes unanimously. Now we're on to item 8. These are items that require a separate vote. We start with a series of zoning cases. The first is in Ward 6. It's an ABC issue on South Agnew. Meg?
Thank you, Mayor. Is the applicant here? Why don't you come forward, please? And while you're coming forward, and actually we need your name and address for the record, please.
Dusty Embry, 1800 Edinburgh Court.
Great.
You can
This
help
is a little bit more complicated than it looks on the front page of the memo, in that there was a non-conforming bar operating in this location for a long time.
Yes, ma'am.
But you took over operation in December of 2010?
That's when Chad Stockup purchased it. Chad Stockup he was unable to be here. He's the building owner.
Okay?
I represent the applicants wanting to put in the restaurant bar.
Okay. And so when he acquired the building in 2010, there was a club operating with without a beer or mixed beverage license.
Okay.
And given the time frame, the ABC overlay had expired.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I believe the original request, Bob, was for an ABC 3 license, for a club license.
That's correct. And
Yes, ma'am.
And the zoning won't allow that, so the new request has been for an ABC 2, which means they're required to serve, 50% of the revenues need to be derived from food.
that's correct.
All correct? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And is that your plan?
Yes, ma'am, definitely.
Okay. What kind of a restaurant?
Mexican.
Already. Bob, your staff report suggests that we ought to be able to have them demonstrate their ability to do that. Is there any way we can, how do we monitor that?
Well, if they try to operate as a bar and not do their 50% food sales, the ABLE Commission will change the classification on that, and they'll notify us, and then we'll be able to go in and try to do zoning enforcement on it. But we've met with the applicant. You know, they provided a site plan. They've enlarged their kitchen. I mean, we feel pretty comfortable that they'll be able to operate like a restaurant and meet the ABC2 requirements.
Well, the neighborhood clearly is appropriate. I mean, this is an appropriate use for the neighborhood, and as long as you're comfortable that they'll meet the requirements. There were no protests at the Planning Commission, and Planning did recommend approval. So.
And if at any time the police department decides that they're operating outside, like a club instead of a restaurant, you know, we can send enforcement in and try to deal with it.
And you're very clear about that?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. Well, then I'd go ahead and move approval.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 8A1. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8A2 is a zoning case in Ward 7. It's currently a C3 community commercial district, and it would become an I2 moderate industrial district. Skip?
Mayor, I haven't received any calls in reference to protest. Is the applicant here? Could you just give us a brief outline of...
Yes, my name's Don Faulkner, and I represent the owner of the property. For whatever reason, this property's been zoned C3 for years. The warehouse that exists on it now was built in either 1980 or 81. It's been utilized as a warehouse all this time. The owner is interested in selling the property and has a buyer. That buyer visited with the city staff and felt like it should be rezoned to I2, which is the same as everything around it. And so we're just requesting that it be rezoned.
And so this will be just for purposes of a distribution center, is that correct?
The company that plans to buy it, if that goes through, is a kind of a franchise operation of a company that mixes detergents. They come in containers. They're mixed according to the ultimate customer's use and then redistributed to that customer.
Okay. I recommend approval and pass this.
Okay, cast your votes on item 8A2.
Thank you, Don.
Passed unanimously. Item 8A3 is in Ward 4. The address is 3801 South Post Road. It's currently R1 single family and an AE2 Airport Environs Overlay District, and it would become a new planned unit development. Pete?
Yes, as applicants understand there's a change to the recommendation from the Planning Commission, and Dennis is going to explain it to us.
Dennis Box. I'm here with Tony Masato. This is a application for a PUD, and this is going to be a nursery that Tony is working on now. We're excited about it. It will bring, we think, lots of new growth for south and southeast Oklahoma City and all of Oklahoma City. After the Planning Commission, we were put on notice by two of the billboard companies that they still thought they had a lease. We still agree that we're going to take down the easternmost billboards, but we have to get through litigation with them, and we put them on notice that we don't think they have a lease and we want them to take it down. So I have provided a language to the staff, and that language provides that the two easternmost billboards are each governed by an existing lease. When the lease term expires, the two easternmost billboards will be removed, and that would be the only change we'd request. Those billboards have been out on the site for a long time, and frankly, we think they're inconsistent with the use that Tony wants to put on the property.
Will that require a motion from the, to change it, or is that something you can accept, Bob?
You should make that a part of your motion to
Part of the
approve.
motion. Okay. I was by it this morning. It's obvious to me that the two easternmost billboards are he's going to want them to come down. They're going to interfere with the way that he runs the business. I mean, it's going to cut down the visual access that you have when you drive by the business if he doesn't get them down. So I'm sure he's going to want to take them down. So this is a business that grew from a small business, from a very small business at his residence to a very large business. Employs a lot of folks. And I'm going to move approval subject to the amendment as stated.
I have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 8A3. It's a zoning case in Ward 4. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8A4 is in Ward 6. The address is 3645 Southwest 29th Street. It's currently C3 Community Commercial and AE2 Airport Environs Overlay. It would become a simplified plan unit development. Meg?
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this is to allow a car dealership. Is the applicant here? I don't see it. Bob, you recommended, planning recommended approval of this with two technical items, no loudspeakers, and a revision of the site-proof screening. Have they been accepted?
Yes, they've agreed to that. The property across the street's zoned I-2. They could do that, a car lot by right across the street. We felt that this was consistent with the zoning pattern.
Great, okay. I then request approval.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and we're voting now on item 8A4. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8A5 is in Ward 3. The address is 3800 South Portland Avenue. It's currently R1 Single Family, C3 Community Commercial, and AE2 Airport Environments Overlay District, and it would become a new simplified plan unit development. Larry?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Is the applicant present?
Okay.
If you would come forward and give your name and address and what the intent is here to brief the council, I appreciate it.
My name is Gary Walker. I'm with Cornerstone Regional Surveying, 1921 North Penn, Independence, Kansas, here for the applicant. The intent is to build a Dollar General store on this site. The Dollar General has worked diligently with the planning staff to meet all of their concerns and the concerns of the Planning Zoning Commission, and we request approval of our application.
Now, this is a kind of a very exciting development for this neighborhood. This is the first new retail that's gone into this area in a number of years, and so we're real excited about it. Has anybody signed up to protest? There were no protesters at the Planning Commission. Bob, the question on the easement?
They were supposed to bring it with them to the meeting today, the easement.
I have no knowledge of that. I'm sorry.
So we probably need to defer this a week and give them a chance. They told us that they were going to bring it, but don't have it yet.
And that's what we show here, that they were going to bring it. Based on that, I move for deferral for a week before we approve it.
Okay. Motion and a second on the deferral. Cast your votes. That item is deferred. Item 8A6 is in Ward 6. The address is 3304 and 08 Northwest 23rd Street. It's R1 Single Family Residential and Urban Conservation District, and it would be a new spud. Meg?
Ward 6 is busy today.
Yes.
Lots going on. Is the applicant here for this project? I guess not. This is actually a vacant lot along Northwest 23rd Street near May, and the proposed project is to build a dental office. Lots of similar operations along May, and Bob, the only technical evaluation was, I guess the applicant agreed to parking in both in the front and the back of the building.
That's correct. They proposed two site plans, one with all the parking in the front, and then one where they put one row in the front and the rest in the back, and that's what they're proposing here.
Did anybody sign up to protest this one? No? And there were none at the Planning Commission. So hearing that, I would move approval, please.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 8A6. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously.
Mayor,
Yes?
may I ask a question, Bob? Just a general question related to this case. Bob, this is in the 23rd Street Overlay District, and it accomplishes what one of the things it accomplishes that we spend a lot of time on. I just can't remember whether we adopted it as part of the overlay. This is a two-lot frontage, so I assume it's a 100-foot frontage with one access, so that we're not allowing access on a 50-foot frontage on new development. Did we institute that into the overlay district where any new development would require a 100-foot frontage? I know there was discussion at the same time on Southwest 44th Street overlay district, and we were trying to get there, but I don't know if we ever did.
I remember that we were asking them to combine lots so we can limit the number of access points. I can't remember if it's 100 feet or not. In this case, there's properties on both sides of it, and since it didn't have an existing house on it, it doesn't have the standards where we try to get all the parking in the back. They were allowed to design it, but it really meets that guideline because it's...
No, I know that. No, I'm saying that
I'd
this
have to check.
accomplishes what we were trying to get, but...
Yeah, I don't remember if it was 100 feet or not in the overlay or not, but I'll check that.
Could you please?
Yeah.
I don't know whether it happened down on 44th Street or not, Pete, but I think the discussion was...
Yeah, we haven't done that overlay yet.
And the idea is to increase the size of the lots to decrease the number of turn-ins?
Right, we want
Number of
to
driveways.
share drives as opposed to everybody backing out on the 23rd Street.
I see. Okay. We're on to item 8B. Looks like we're closing some stuff. First, we're going to vote on closing a plat 20-foot alley in Ward 2, south of 95th Street. Sam, you okay with this?
Yes, Mayor, and this is an addition, school addition, building addition at Britton Elementary School. Reason for this, there's no protest at planning. Is there any protest today? Move approval.
Okay, it's the first of three of these in Ward 2, so we'll vote on the first one. This is 8B1. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Sam, the next one's on 47th Street.
And this is to accomplish the same thing, MAPS 3 building addition, Monroe Elementary. Any protest here? Move for approval.
Yeah. Maps for Kids improvements.
Yes.
Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. And the third one is on Northwest 30th Street between Dewey and Paseo.
Yes, thank you. And I see the applicant, John Belt, here owns both sides of the alley, and this would be so to close the alley to restrict vehicular access so that we'd have actually improved pedestrian access through there. There was no protest at planning. Is there any protest today? Move for approval.
All right, we're voting on item 8B3, and it passes unanimously. Item 8B4 is in Ward 8. It's to close 17 foot of right-of-way. It's on an area near Meridian and south of Northwest 164th Street. Pat?
Thank you, Your Honor. This is sort of a cleanup project. The Meridian Avenue through there never opened and been vacated, and this is the additional right-of-way along Meridian Avenue in the subdivision to vacate it also and sort of clean up things. An item that probably had been overlooked in the original application. I move approval.
So Meridian does not go through?
Meridian does not go through it. It never was opened up.
Well, is that a street there?
No, that's the property going through the subdivision. There's no street there.
Okay, so it's in the backs of houses?
Yes.
Okay.
And the Meridian's been vacated for a long time.
Right.
And this is just some additional right-of-way along Meridian.
Okay. We're voting on item 8B4. Any comments or questions? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8B5 is in Ward 7. It's to close a 5-foot street and easement on a utility west of North Walnut between 2nd and 3rd Street. Skip?
Yes, this is for a street improvement. It was previously introduced in February, and there's no, I haven't received any objections or any protests to this, and so I'd move that we pass it.
Second.
Okay, we're voting on item 8B5. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8BC is for a special permit for an auto dealership in Ward 1. Gary?
Thank you, Mayor. Anybody signed up to speak on this, Francis? Do we have any protesters here? Another car lot on 39th Street. Do they accept all the TEs, Bob? Okay, move approval.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 8C. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8D is a public hearing regarding dilapidated structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8D? All right, we have a motion and a second. We're voting on all of the items listed under 8D1. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Move on to item 8E, which is a public hearing regarding unsecured structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8E? All right, we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8F, I understand we do not need executive session.
We do not.
Okay, cast your votes on 8F. Passed unanimously. Item 8G is a claim recommended for denial. We have one person that has signed up to speak. Kendra Ramsey. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Good. You might want to pull the microphone down just a little bit. We'll need your name and address for the record.
Kendra Ramsey, 4403 Buckhorn, El Reno.
Okay.
I just wanted to speak on behalf of this claim, I guess, that I was told that you did not pay these claims if there has not been a claim in that area within 6 months. Is that true?
I don't know. We can get some legal advice.
Okay. Well, you have filled potholes out there in the last 6 months, so therefore there must have been some sort of knowledge that there was a problem there.
What we did was we checked the records of within a half mile in each direction, and we had not had any notice of any potholes in a half mile in each direction on that segment of street. I believe that there were some about a mile to a mile and a half away.
Okay. Kendra, let me see if I can break this down for you. State law puts in enabling legislation and guides municipalities on what they can pay and what they can't pay. When it comes to potholes, even though it may seem like if a pothole exists and your car is damaged, it may seem like there should be some sort of recourse against the municipality where you are. Unless there's been a specific notice about that pothole or one very similar, and the municipality has neglected to get out and fix it, then the municipality cannot by law pay that claim. And am I fairly accurate there?
Okay,
Get the law
so I want to know what triggered you to go fill all of these holes 2 weeks after the accident. I mean, what would have told you that there was a problem out there?
I have no idea, but I don't know what that has to do with your claim.
That there was something triggered for you to have done that, so apparently you guys knew there was a problem out there.
We didn't have any prior notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was $1,000 out of our pocket, and I'm letting you know there is a problem there. All of those that you have filled are now cracking again. So.
Which street specifically are you referring to?
Southwest 29th, between Highway 92 and Banner Road.
Okay.
The entire street is cracked out really bad. So.
When did your event take place?
December 7th.
Okay.
And they filled them probably within 2 weeks of the accident. So, thank you.
Thank you for coming in today. We have a motion and a second on item 8G. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 9 is claims recommended for approval. Any comments or questions on item 9? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 10 is items from council. It's our second chance to look at an item brought forth by Councilman Ryan. Pat, you want to say anything today before we move the resolution?
Yeah, just a quick comment, Your Honor. I had an opportunity to discuss this resolution with several of my colleagues and had some good questions on it. One of the questions dealt with the scenario if we had a revenue forecast that was less than the 5-year average we were looking at. And my assumption was that the revenue forecast would take precedent and establish a cap because we obviously can't spend more money than we have. And so not part of the resolution, it was assumption that that's just the way the mechanics of the thing would work.
This is a shall not exceed limit. So.
And so it would be within the limit, we comply with the resolution, but the question was, what would be the impact of, for instance, a 2% revenue forecast increase in a 5% average for 5 years, and the 2% revenue forecast would take precedent in that case, establish what we would spend in the upcoming year. And so I think that was an assumption I made, and that the mechanics would work that way, and it doesn't specifically call for that in the resolution.
Right, that would, it'd be up to the council, it'd be your decision if you wanted to go with the revenue forecast that was below the 5-year average.
That's exactly what I said, Kenny. Thank you. So with that, and if there are any other questions, we'll try to answer those now. If there are no questions, I would move approval of the resolution.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on this item? All right, looks like we're ready to go. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously.
Thank you, and I want to thank my colleagues for their cooperation on this one. It's a step, small step, albeit in our efforts to create a sustainable financial model for the city.
Gary, you want to get us started on a roundtable of items from council? Sam? Larry? Right. Wow, this is amazing.
No, so I'm going to
stop the streak.
I'm going to stop the streak. I'll take some time here. Just a couple of things. I want to remind everybody that March is Red Cross Month, and this coming Saturday, the Red Cross is offering free training. It's called Save a Life Day, and it's actually in honor of Representative Gabrielle Giffords. Her office was so impressed with the fact that lives were saved during that tragedy in Tucson because people were able to quickly administer life-saving techniques. So Oklahoma City is one of 100 cities across the country that's participating in this program, and it's about 45 minutes of training in 3 areas, stopping external bleeding, managing shock, and hands-only CPR. And so contact the Red Cross if you're interested in finding out about any of that training. I want to say congratulations to Dee Downard. She celebrated her 80th birthday this last week, and Dee has been an amazing advocate and ambassador for the South Oklahoma City Chamber for almost all those 80 years. She's just terrific. And thirdly, I'd like to thank Commissioner Mon and for spending some time with me yesterday. Skip, I think you had a chance to do so on Saturday, but we took some time to cruise around Ward 6 and look at some of the sites that the Commissioner is helping us clean up. We did go out to Crystal Lake, and we've taken out 1,200 tires out of that site so far.
Oh, my gosh.
In addition to tons of trash. And there's some areas down around where Central Park's going to be.
1,200 tires?
1,200 tires, just so far.
How does that happen?
It's unbelievable. And there are areas all over the city.
We should probably all thank the county and
that have this
Commissioner
problem.
Mon then for proactively helping us with that project.
I think the River Trust is preparing a resolution of recognition for his efforts out there.
Right, and a number of the places that we went to look at were right down there along the riverbank, and so it will make a big difference for the projects we're working on. So thank you very much for the time.
All right, Skip?
Mayor, I would like to ask that staff prepare a list of the projects that have been part of the Community Block Grant Program that has benefited the city of Oklahoma City, at least probably for the last 5 years, to give recognition of those programs and to show people how they have been used in a very great way to enhance quality of life for citizens in the city of Oklahoma City. I think the Community Block Grant Program is coming up under a major attack by, unfortunately, party alignment. And I think that if people really understand and know what they have benefited from in all these neighborhoods in the city of Oklahoma City and all the major infrastructure projects in reference to water projects and youth projects, I just really think we should put it out there so people will know that this is really not something that's a party-based issue. This is something that really changes lives in communities and cities. And so I would like for us to present that so we could have it out in the open.
We'd be happy to do that.
Okay. And one of the other issues, I did take a ride Saturday with Commissioner Mon, and I think it's really kind of there's a time, I think, when we all need to know what really exists in the city of Oklahoma City. I wasn't aware of the plight of Crystal Park and the conditions that exist in that area, and then to find out how private programs and nonprofit programs have stepped up to come forth and make quality programs for young people and for those individuals who have challenges in life to really improve that whole area. I took the tour all around the park, and it was almost, it was really almost painful to see what has happened to a great park that, you know, people have just used as nothing but a dumping ground now. And Councilman Stallion talks about all the tires out there. You know, this whole issue about dumping in our city, I think we need to just get a stronger policy as it relates to dumping and as it relates to those individuals who have businesses that you can almost track directly to where this trash and dumping and tires are coming from. You know, there's a business out there that you could almost immediately just, you know, look and see that much of this is coming from some of the areas right there in the vicinity. Speaking of dumping, we spent a lot of money on Big Trash Day, and I've received so many calls from people that this Big Trash Day has just really gotten out of hand, I think. I think people are setting trash out in front of their yards, and it's almost 30 days before the actual Big Trash Day comes. And we're supposed to have a policy that is only, 4 days prior to, doesn't get enforced. And it's gotten to the point where people are just literally remodeling the houses and just stacking everything out on the curb. And it just creates a complete blight for a lot of neighborhoods. And I just think that, you know, either we need to increase just open for dialogue right now, but maybe we need to consider increasing the fine for those individuals who are going to just completely violate the issue of setting trash out 30 days prior to, and sometimes they put it on other people's property. And I just think it just, you know, it does more harm to our community than it does good. And I know this whole issue about, you know, that was to create or to solve a problem of people illegally dumping, but it's not. You know, they just gave me a report 2 weeks ago. I think we spent $40,000. You know, probably some of it have to be paid, come out of the River Trust, but, you know, it was just an area where this individual has just taken it to basically say that he's going to do what he wants to do on the property. And it just basically created a dump site in, you know, inside the city. And we go out there and we clean it up, and Parks Department, Public Works, you know, and at the end, they got a tab of almost $40,000 that we got to eat just because, and this guy never gets the citation or anything. So I just think those are some issues that we really need to start looking at as far as increasing some of our policies in reference to enforcement as it relates to trash and dumping.
Okay. Pat?
Your Honor, just a quick comment on what Skip said. We had a couple of neighborhoods in Ward 8 where we had some similar problems, people putting their big trash out too soon. And the city manager called for some increased enforcement out there, and we cited some people for that, and it seemed to work on the problem. So enforcement may be an important part of this, dealing with this issue. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Brian?
I actually have a question I forgot to ask. Jim, I had a constituent ask me in regard to trash service, are we under contract with our citizens to provide trash service weekly? Is that how it would be phrased, or?
Well, I've never seen it phrased that way. We provide a,
a
service.
The question was, if trash service is not rendered to, say, a neighborhood or something, and this is back during the snowstorm, would they be in some way should they be credited on their account for having a trash day missed?
Yeah, and the answer to that's no. It's an act of God that's out there. We eventually do pick the trash up. We may miss some of it, but eventually all that trash is removed.
Okay, so even if it's the following trash day, then you would say that we're complying with our
But
agreement?
we're still picking up last week's trash at that point.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah, Pete.
I also had a thought that I missed. We had another spate of fires in the very same area that they occurred in April 2009, out close to where I live. And a thought occurred to me then, and it is reoccurred now, because these fires are occurring in rural areas that are not, where we don't have the right to enforce mowing in AA areas. And the grass weeds get high and the brush accumulates, and they become just a magnet for those kind of fires. And I wonder if we've ever looked into the possibility that the fire department could be licensed to burn, or authorized is a better word perhaps, to burn private property in a as a method of fire prevention. If a controlled burn on some of those areas would have prevented a lot of those fires, because they're just, I mean, there's no law that in AA that you can require somebody to mow their property, and so many people don't. And if there are at least some people that were concerned about losing their homes were able to contract with the fire department to do a controlled burn around their property, at least those that cared about it would have an opportunity to save their houses. Somehow I've had the understanding that there's not enabling legislation to do that, but I'd like to look into it and see. You know, when I was younger, and that was a long time ago, the people used to burn their front yards. You know, you'd burn your yard because that was theoretically that was good, and I've been a big proponent of the controlled burns around the lake, and the real success of that is yet to be seen. But it's obvious that it's going to be successful to do that. And I would just like to look at the fire department being authorized to do controlled burns on private property, if the homeowner had to pay a fee for that. I wouldn't expect to pay the total cost, because you're paying it to some extent in the salaries of the firefighters and all that, but some kind of a fee where that could be managed, it would seem to me to make sense in the rural areas. And I'm sure others have rural areas that would benefit from it also.
Let us look into that and see if there is enabling legislation that may take place, and what the obstacles may be, and then also the practical standpoint.
Right. And I think they're gaining some pretty valuable experience. Oklahoma City Fires gained some valuable experience in watching this controlled burn we had at Draper, and we're going to do some more, so they'll learn more about how that, because that's a little different kind of a fire than...
Okay, you succeeded in talking long enough, you're going to get me involved in it.
Well, if it was about fire, I'd be disappointed if you weren't.
We've looked at that before in years past, and I don't want to speak for the current chief. He can certainly look at that and see. And it's a good idea, and it makes a lot of sense sometimes. But what a lot of people don't understand is the times that you can burn are also the critical times when you have grass fires going everywhere else too. That, in my mind, that kind of makes it where you can't use on-duty personnel to do it, because once you start a fire, you can't pull off of it, you know, whether you started it or whether it's accidental. So if you've got your on-duty people tied up doing the burns, and you have grass fires somewhere else, it's a little difficult to manage some of those sometimes. So that would necessitate doing it with off-duty or overtime people put together. Not to say you couldn't do it. You could create a burn task force and use overtime to do that with. But then that is a cost factor for the people that need to get it burned too, unless the city wants to subsidize that for them. So that's just a thought. I mean,
the rules, though, as have been explained to me about these controlled burns are I mean, they want it to be after a rain and not too far after a rain. I mean, they wouldn't burn today, I'll tell you, even though there's a lot of fuel out there to burn. Their rules would not let them burn today.
Are there other communities that do this, Pete? Do you know?
I don't know.
Maybe we could look into that if there's some best practices out there that figure out a way to do it.
I think we find ourselves in and I've said this before about the unique situation Oklahoma City finds itself in that there's a place to live. There's a living environment for every style that you want to live in, and most cities don't have that. Most cities don't have ranches inside their city limits, and we have some. And so I'm not sure you're going to find best practices in Dallas are going to have much impact on what we do. We're in kind of a unique. It's just a thought, but this is twice in 2 years they've been within a mile of my house, and I know others have lost their home. So I'm not comparing being within a mile to lose my house, but I suspect the feeling I had is similar to the other people's. And the mayor of Choctaw lost his home this last week.
Are you suggesting there's some level of fire prevention in this?
Yes.
Is that your goal?
Right.
It's not to get rid of trash and debris. It's
No. It's the same theory that we used to burn at Draper, is that it's a way to prevent a source of ignition for larger fires that would be out of control. It's controlling the burning.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be applicable everywhere, but there's certain places I can see its applicability.
All right.
And it can be done on a very small scale. It wouldn't have to be done 6,000 acres at a time. And there are 6,000 acres out there that we could burn all at one time if we have them. We own that much ourselves. Anyway, it's just a thought.
Okay. That's it from items from council. City manager reports.
Well, this has been a nice segue into our presentation this morning and some of the comments made by Councilman Kelly and others regarding property management, taking care of your property and trash and those items. A lot of that stems to vacant and abandoned properties. So this morning, Russell and Jeff Butler are here to talk to us a little bit about some thoughts and ideas about what other cities, first of all, helping us identify our problem and talking about some options that are out there regarding that issue. Russell?
Thank you, Jim. While Jeff's handling that out, I did want to pass on my thanks to Jeff. Jeff's put a lot of work into this. It's something we've been working on for a couple of years now in cooperation with the Finance Department, and this is an issue that affects the city as a whole and certainly affects some departments more particularly than others. Fire, police, development services, planning, and finance are all very directly affected by this particular issue, utilities as well. And, while we've done a lot of work, the information that I'm going to present today is really just a preliminary, and I'm going to sort of structure this and define what the extent of the problem is, how large it is, where it is, and then go into what we believe to be some of the impacts on the community based on what I would say is imperfect data. We don't have a perfect data source here. We're primarily relying on data that we've obtained from the United States Postal Service and the census, and this data is not gathered for the purpose that we're using it for today. So I did want to put that caveat in there. It's not perfect data, but it does indicate some significant trends and issues that if we were to burrow down into this in more detail, would probably only confirm what we're seeing out of this data. Postal Service data, for example, is gathered by postal carriers, and so it's sort of the information they bring back, and it's related solely to their ability to be able to deliver mail. So if there's an address that they cannot deliver mail to, then they make a note of it, and they actually exclude those properties that are the worst properties, the ones that they don't believe have any future prospects for receiving mail. They don't even include those in their statistics, so the worst properties are actually not included. But nevertheless, the trends are there. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about, just very briefly, are some potential solutions, some lessons that we're seeing from other communities. These are not, this is not an in-depth discussion. What I'm asking for today is direction, your thoughts on this as an issue, direction on where you would like to see us do further work and come back with further recommendations. We have done a lot of work, as I said, on these other communities, so we can bring that back in fairly short order, but we're really just introducing the issue today. We also, this is focused solely on vacant and abandoned properties that have structures on them. It's not focused on vacant land, and that's another extension of the same issue. So this is United States Postal Service data. Based on this information that we obtained in June of last year, we estimate there are approximately 16,000 properties that are vacant and abandoned in Oklahoma City. A little more than half of these have been vacant for longer than 3 years. So these are a long-standing issue.
Just to put that in perspective, what percent of households is that?
I couldn't tell you that. I can get back to you with that.
It's a big number.
It is a pretty concerning number. And 3/4 of these properties are residential, so a quarter commercial, 3/4 residential. That includes multifamily and single family. This map here illustrates where the problem is, and focus on the colors. The yellow, orange, and red are the worst statistics in the city, and as you might expect, a lot of this is concentrated in the inner city. The yellow begins at about 8%, goes up to almost 13%, and the red area there, and this is an area of, that you can see a couple of particular pockets there. One of those includes those apartments out on Northwest 10th Street, but there's some significant pockets there, but those red areas signify vacancy rates of 18 to 26%, and probably above that as well. So there's a very high vacancy rate in those particular areas. Green areas are areas with less than 8% generally in vacancy. And what is the trend? Well, no surprise there. This really coincides very closely with that prior map. This is based on census data. The last map was based on Postal Service data. This is census data between the 2000 and the 2010 census, and this indicates properties that have gone dark in that 10-year time frame. Again, the yellow, orange, and red are the problem areas, same in that center city. We estimated about 6,000 units have gone vacant in that time frame, and about 1,150 of those have actually been demolished. So there's another 4,850 that we are making the assumption are out there vacant that were not vacant in the year 2000. So the trend is negative in the center city, and then positive occupancy in the fringe around that.
Russell, you mentioned an apartment complex on Northwest 10th. Is that the whole apartment complex? Or?
There are several out there that have been vacant for a period of time now, and it may just not be the apartments as well. I mean, one of the things that we're talking about today is these apartments or these vacant properties tend to exacerbate additional vacancies. So once you start, you get past a particular critical mass, and it sort of exacerbates the problem. So we don't have the specifics on exactly which apartment complexes might be causing problems. We're not at that level of data here. I mean, that's what we would like to do at some point in the future. If we're going to try and address the issue, then clearly we're going to need to know exactly where those addresses are.
But you can break this down into the various wards, right?
Yes. We haven't done that, but we could.
Those apartment units, for instance, Northwest 10th, could be complexes of 250 units, and it's listed here as one property.
Well, it's not listed here as one property. There are actually a couple of different complexes out there.
But I mean, an apartment complex is listed on this data as one property.
Well, no, it's residential units. So they would be listed as 200 to 400 units. So that red category in loss on this map here is 200 to 400 units that have gone dark in that time frame. So it could be just one apartment complex that causes that red dot. This is based on, as I said, census data, so it's whatever those census tracts are. So there may be one or two there.
Okay, so the 16,000 addresses include...
Yes, it includes residential units in multifamily.
Okay.
Just to provide a point of comparison with some of our peer cities, we are the lighter colored bar on this chart, and we sit somewhere in the second tier there. On the far left, you have Detroit. This is a metropolitan statistical area, so it's the metro area. It's not the city boundary. It's likely that some of these cities like Detroit, immediately to our left is St. Louis. We know they have very high vacancy rates, so they're probably higher than this. It is Postal Service data. As I said, it's imperfect. But the point here is to sort of illustrate where we sit in comparison with some of our peer cities. So we've got, we're about equal. If the St. Louis MSA are below Detroit, which is a good thing. But a lot of the other cities that we sort of look to as comparison, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Salt Lake City, they're all to our right. So they have a lower vacancy rate according to this particular chart. And the next one here, I really want to focus on what the trend is here rather than the actual numbers. But in 1960, we've almost, since 1960, the red line indicates Oklahoma City, and this is within the city boundaries. That rate of vacancy has almost doubled from 1960 to 2008. The line immediately below that, mostly below that, is the state average, and then the bottom line is the U.S. average. So we're significantly above the U.S. average in terms of vacancy rates. I mean, the concern there, of course, is the trend. The trend seems to be going in the wrong direction. Now, look at what that means in terms of impacts on us in the community. There are a lot of intangible, and we've tried to get as much tangible analysis as we can out of this with the data that we have. But there are a lot of intangible effects as well, and we would like to try and convert those as much into real numbers as we can. But clearly, these properties have a negative impact on neighborhoods. They create a public nuisance. There are statistics from virtually all the other communities that we have looked at that indicates that there is a much higher rate of service activity, that's police, fire, etc., that is incumbent with these particular properties. So they create a public nuisance in that respect. They also hurt neighborhood appearance. You've got a lot of people in a neighborhood who are very concerned about the appearance of the neighborhood because that sends a signal about the security and the health of the neighborhood. These properties generally are not as well kept since there's nobody there, so they're going to bring down the appearance of the neighborhood. It depresses property values, and I have a chart on the next page which is a really damning illustration of that. Depresses investment interest. If people are going to invest in a particular area, whether it be commercial or residential, there are a large number of vacant properties there. They don't believe that their investment will be as secure and therefore are far less likely to invest in those areas that have a high vacancy rate. And of course, you have those higher crime statistics as well. So there are a number of different negatives that are going to depress that. And then a lot of these areas, most areas in the city, develop concurrently with adjoining commercial areas. So if you have a declining residential area with high vacancies, then that's going to bleed into higher commercial vacancies as well. And it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. It happens probably concurrently that some of these retailers leave, and that depresses the residential as well. So hard to say which is causing which, but both become a problem. Now these numbers that we have from the other cities are very interesting. The bullseye chart there is from Philadelphia. This was a study that was conducted in 2001, and what they wanted to find out is what that negative impact is on adjoining property. So you have a vacant or abandoned property. They found that there's a negative impact within 150 feet of about $7,200. So every property within 150 feet is depressed $7,200, and then that rate of depression decreases as you move further out. The next line is about 68, and it gets out to 3,500 when you get out past 300 feet. So that's a very significant negative impact on property values. And that's what this issue is. It's about those negative fiscal effects on people who own property and then the services that the city is able to provide. Baltimore did a study, and they went into a lot of detail with their study because they have a fee that relates to vacant and abandoned properties, as a lot of other communities do. they actually tabulated how many minutes of police and fire time. This is just police and fire, it's not code enforcement. Police and fire time was dedicated towards addressing issues associated with vacant and abandoned properties. And they found there a cost of $1,472. And if we tabulated that same number in Oklahoma City, based on the vacancy rate that we've got here, and interestingly enough, Philadelphia has very similar demographics in terms of housing values, that would equate to a cost for public safety in Oklahoma City of approximately $12 million. Now, clearly we're not going to abate all vacant and abandoned properties, but some number lower than the current number would generate those kind of some level of savings. Richmond found that out of all the different indicators for the health or criminal activity in a neighborhood, the best predictor was the rate of vacant and abandoned properties in that neighborhood or on that block. Same thing in Austin. They found a doubling of the crime rate in areas that had a high vacant and abandoned property rate. Interestingly also, in Austin, they found that 83% of those properties have evidence of use for drugs, prostitution, and other criminal activities. So 83% of those properties are affected some way in that respect. So these are pretty damning statistics.
Russell, I know these are all costs. You're talking about cost impact. You mentioned Baltimore assesses some kind of fee. Is that part of the recommendations or part of the considerations at the end of the report?
It's one of the considerations. Okay. It's one of the things we'd like to have direction on. In terms of the costs on us, clearly there are increased city services that relate to these properties. Another issue that, and if you start to sort of burrow down into what these impacts are, another issue that may not be as obvious to a lot of people is that because these buildings are not occupied, there's nobody there who is actually generating sales tax. They're generating costs, they're not generating revenue. We did an estimate based on the data that we have and estimated that we're probably losing approximately $10 million in municipal sales excise use tax as a result of those properties not being in use. And if you extrapolate that Philadelphia data again, in terms of the 16,000 abandoned properties that we have in the city, that relates to a $1.7 billion depreciation in general property values in Oklahoma City. Now, we haven't been able to account for overlap and compounding or other mitigating effects there, but the idea is to sort of, to indicate that this is a fairly significant detrimental impact on the city. We don't know what that precise number is, this is just based on what we've got. And if you take that then and extrapolate that to what the losses in city revenues are, that's about $2.7 million in lost GO bond property tax revenues that are assigned to the city. And we haven't done all the calculations, but we have done an evaluation of the school districts, all the school districts within Oklahoma City, and they're losing about $10 million as well in terms of revenues that they would be able to use on an annual basis. Another negative with these properties, we believe the current system really is structured towards rewarding the owners of these properties. The worst condition your property is in, by the county assessors evaluation, they reduce the property taxes. And I have some examples coming up here that illustrate the extent of that problem. But you are essentially, as a property owner of a vacant and abandoned property, rewarded with very low property taxes for keeping that property vacant. The longer it's vacant, the lower your property taxes go. Another issue, we have provided infrastructure for these properties. The trash trucks still go by there. We have water and sewer hooked up there. They have access to fire and police. All of those services are there, and if that property is not being occupied and paying for those services, what it means in essence is that those occupants are somewhere else, and they could be somewhere else in the city, or they could be somewhere else in another city, but in effect we're having to provide infrastructure for that vacant building and an occupied building elsewhere. So we're basically doubling our infrastructure and service commitment on those particular properties. So here's a couple of examples, and these are all immediately adjacent to each other. So just for point of comparison. So the house on the left there, been vacant, boarded up for at least 8 years. Their total taxes annually are $250, so that works out to about 9 cents a square foot. House immediately next door is paying $2,200 and 96 cents a square foot. So almost a tenfold difference in terms of the property taxes paid. So if you maintain your property, you've got a viable, occupied property, you're paying 10 times the rate of the person next door who is generally generating increased services for the city in terms of fire and police activity. Another property here on North Chartel, that one was on 17th Street. Another one on North Chartel, boarded for at least 7 years, taxes of $308. Property immediately next door, 10 times the taxes paid there of $3,000. This one here on 26th Street, 626 Northwest 26th. Property on the left vacant for at least 7 years, paying taxes of $260. Property on the right, which is one that city staff were actually participated in the rehabilitation of. It's occupied now. Its taxes are $1,334. Again, multiplication in terms of the difference. This one is probably one of the more extreme. We have the Walcourt building, if people are familiar with this. It's up on Northeast 13th, just immediately adjacent to the Broadway extension. Been vacant for 34 years. Their total taxes are $353. Property, residential, single-family residential immediately to the east is paying $1,609. Their taxes per square foot are 22 times what the Walcourt building is paying in terms of taxes. There is no incentive for this property owner, and we know there have been a lot of different people who've been trying to redevelop this property, but there's no incentive for this property owner to fix up that property and put it back on the market.
Well, you know, one of the incentives would be, you know, I pass by this location all the time, and it sits on the corner of 13th and Walnut, sort of. The conditions of this building, no other small house in neighborhoods would have sustained the longevity that this has, because we would have torn it down. I mean, the windows has been out for probably as long as 20-some odd years, off and on. Vagrants has been in and out of it almost all the time. And, you know, you get some of the same properties that if the roof is bad, if there's a swag in the roof, if there's, you know, if the windows are out and it's abandoned, you know, we do the code enforcement, and ultimately those people's property is going to be, you know, put on the list as dilapidated and ultimately demolished. I think sometimes we give too much advantage to some of these properties just because of the size of the property, whether or not it's commercial property or residential property. And I just think it's an unfair, you know, treatment as it relates to individuals who may be the owner of a smaller residential property in a community. You know, yeah, this has been an eyesore for a long time.
Yeah, I do have a little bit of a code enforcement history on this building, and we don't have the records for police, but we know they've been out there a number of times as well, because we do have vagrants living in there, homeless during the ice storm, have had fires in there, so there have been police action out there, but they had a junk and debris in 04, property maintenance in 06, unsecured in 07, unsecured again in March this year, and junk and debris again in March of this year. So that's just an indication of the additional services that these properties are generating.
I have a question.
I have a
You
question.
said you said that there's no incentive for them to do anything with the property. Well, they're losing revenue. I mean, is that not incentive enough that they could be?
It should be, but it doesn't appear to be enough. And a lot of these, we don't have the breakdown on what the ownership is, but in some cases, they're in trusts or, properties pass through hands, and it doesn't seem to be enough incentive, the fact that they're not getting revenue, to do something about it. And I would agree with you that should be enough, that there's no return on the property, but apparently
So where do you propose that we draw the private property rights of an individual on a piece of property? Because you're going to get down to, I don't mean to jump ahead, but a mechanism to facilitate property acquisition and reuse, which is just as a long statement for the government taking the property and giving it to somebody who can better use it in our eyes. So how do we draw a line? Where does it stop?
Well, that is a policy decision.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about, Brian. We're trying to say, do we want to be more aggressive than we currently are? I think that's what this conversation is, and I think the feeling from staff is that we should be more aggressive based on the best practices in other cities.
I'm not advocating a particular position. I'm just saying that we're trying to do as best we can at illustrating what the extent of the issue is.
Your Honor, I got a couple of questions.
Pat and then Larry.
First of all, are we doing everything we can under our existing code and regulations to deal with these issues? These things have been boarded up for 6 or 7 years. We've got a multiple number of offenses on this particular property you just mentioned. Are we exercising all the authority we have now? And the second question, is there any kind of state statute that either limits or gives us some guidance on what we can do in these kind of issues? It seems like I recall from another career that there was some regulations in the county that if a property had been boarded up for so many years, why then it was subject to being demolished. And I just think we need to explore, before we go too much further, what our limitations might be in terms of statutes and regulations that are in place right now.
Right. You want to respond to that, Russell? Maybe Kenny should.
No, there's not any statutory time limits or anything. You can, basically, it's on a complaint basis. When the city gets a complaint, the city goes out and investigates it and takes what we believe is the appropriate action at the time.
And this is, it overlaps with the dilapidated structure issue, but, if the property is boarded up, some of those previous examples there, they're boarded up, but they're not meeting that criteria for a dilapidated structure or the property maintenance issues. They're just vacant and they're not contributing to the neighborhood. And if they've been vacant and boarded up for a long period of time, it really sends the wrong message for property owners, either the ones existing there to invest or for new property owners to come into the neighborhood.
Larry?
Yeah, I was going to say what Pat was talking about, and also Brian a minute ago, about an individual owner's property rights. But I was under the impression that there is some state law that gives direction on declaring property dilapidated, or if not, we have come up with some guidelines, and I think it'd be helpful at some point in time to have the folks from either legal or inspection come in and give us the guidelines they're working under right now and how far we can go in enforcing these things. 34 years sounds ridiculous to me. I mean, and so my question would be, as on this one right here, why hasn't it been torn down? And there's another factor in there also that has not been talked about yet. When we tear down a property, correct me if I'm wrong, we place a lien against that property, but until that lien is paid, the city is out that money.
Correct.
And so there is another aspect to this that needs to be considered, and that is how much money, correct me if I'm wrong, we want to invest in tearing this stuff down.
Yeah, and I think you would want to try and aim for, and what a lot of other communities have done, is to aim for a program that is at least revenue neutral, so that you're covering your costs. But the current system, is my understanding, Kenny, is that we don't recover a lot of those liens. Those properties,
Yes, if we put the lien on the property, it's in the nature of a tax lien, and if it remains unpaid, then the county treasurer's office is going to sell it at a tax sale. If the county ends up acquiring the property at the tax sales and ultimately owns the property, it extinguishes our lien, so we're just basically out the money at that point.
Sam?
We don't get any money back after the tax sale?
Not if the county acquires the property, we don't.
Could state law change that?
We could change state law.
It is part of a disconnect. I mean, the county is the one who collects the taxes, but we're the ones who are sort of largely responsible for the neighborhood revitalization efforts, so there's a disconnect there.
So if we have a $3,000 weed and mowing and dilapidation, any issues on a property, and we place the lien with the county. Ultimately, the county taxes are not paid, and at some point in time, the county puts the property up for a tax sale. A person purchased the property for our $3,000 lien plus the county taxes. When the county receives the money on that tax deed, they don't reimburse us the $3,000?
No, if the county actually receives money from an individual who purchases the property, we will receive a proportionate share of that. But if no individual actually purchases the property in the tax sales, I believe there's two stages to it. There's a certificate tax sale, and then there can be a resale. If no one purchases the property, it ultimately goes to the county at that point. And if it goes to the county, that's when we lose all of our money.
Okay. So on the actual purchase, Kenny, you said we get a proportion of our money. We don't get all our money?
No, I believe they just proportion it out in accordance with how much money is taken in.
Oftentimes, the liens and the back taxes that exceed the value of the property.
Yeah.
Mayor, on a related matter with regards to vacant properties, this is a little different tack, but all we have the authority to do as a municipality at this time is to declare property dilapidated and tear it down. We do not have the statutory authority. If there's a property that exists, because we're not even talking about that yet, there's a property that exists that we really think is worthy of saving, but it continues to be unoccupied and vacant. I think after the council meeting, Megan, Skip, and our meeting with some of the planning staff to look at a way to address property, vacant property, that we might want to save, not just how we more aggressively tear it down. Because there are those structures that are standing that don't have any pictures of them, or maybe one of these that are really worthy of saving good housing stock, but for whatever reason, again, the owner has not chosen to do anything about it, and the only course that we have, the recourse we have, is to declare it dilapidated and tear it down.
Okay.
Kenny, is there possibly a way to place a lien that would be different than a tax lien? That wouldn't be extinguished?
Not under current law.
That would require some kind of a
Right.
change as well.
There was a Senate bill, I don't know what its status is, but it had a provision in there that it would be attached to property taxes rather than a lien on the property.
I mean, there might be.
It's actually, they call it, it's in the nature of property taxes now. It's prior and superior to all other titles against the property except the ad valorem taxes. So it's treated pretty much on a co-equal basis with the ad valorem taxes. So when they sell the property to recover the taxes, or even if the taxes are being paid and they just sell it to recover our lien, we should get our money that way unless it goes to the county. And really the only way you could fix that would be if the law required the county to pay any existing liens outstanding that were owned by any other governmental entity.
But we kind of stumbled across this problem with the claim that we denied a while ago for the woman's trash we picked up. And it's kept me thinking there might be a better way to do that. I didn't realize that she was at risk of losing her property in a tax sale because of the lien that we placed on it for trash collection.
If we hadn't entered into the agreement with her to do that and decertified the lien, then it would have gone as a lien against her property at the county treasurer's office. If it remained unpaid, and then they would have sold her property to recover the lien.
Yeah, there might be a better strategy than that.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Russell, have you finished yet?
No, we've got a couple more,
All
actually.
right, keep going.
This is phase 3 is just some potential solutions and evaluating what these other communities have done. And from our research, we've determined there are about 350 other municipalities out there, city and county, who have some form of vacant and abandoned property program. Commonalities to each of these is they generally have a vacant property registration system, so that we can keep track of what's out there. And even Tulsa has just instituted such a system within the last year. So they have a $500 registration fee and then a $1,000 fine. If you have two or more code violations, then there's a $1,000 fine if you haven't registered at that point in time. That's fairly modest compared to some of the others. And it's a matter of what you determine to be cost recovery, because there has to be that nexus between cost and impact there. So there are a lot of different other data sources that we could perhaps use to be able to get more accurate information. Utilities data, for example, and that would include city utilities as well as OG&E and ONG. So there are a number of different data sources that we could possibly use to try and get a more accurate picture of vacancy rates and the times that they've been vacant. So police as well, county tax delinquency data, code enforcement data. There are a number of different ways that we could establish and then confirm vacancies there. A more comprehensive approach to code enforcement is another element of that, and then a mechanism to facilitate property acquisition and reuse. A lot of other communities have established land banks as a way of being able to convert these properties back to productive use.
Russell, do I understand that Tulsa has is it a mandatory registration for vacant property by the owner?
I believe it's after 2 code violations. Is that correct, Jeff? Some of the communities have a registration system which is just based on whether you're vacant for 6 months or longer is generally the usual trigger point. Some of them have it based on whether you have a code violation. So the moment you have a code violation, then they will force you to register the property. And theirs is after 2 code violations.
Okay.
So it's meant to attack the sort of the longer standing and more problematical properties. And that's what we would stress as a priority, would be those properties like the Wall Court that have been out there a long period of time. There is no intention, we would not want to institute a system that penalized properties that were being actively marketed, or there were other reasons why that property was vacant and abandoned. There are a number of different waiver systems around different communities as well. So we would want to explore those in more detail and present those options for consideration.
Well, I want to personally thank you, because this has been my cry, it's been my plea since day one of coming to this council. And so to your staff, to the city manager, and whoever was the instigator of making this happen, I just want to thank you, because I think this is what this city needs to do, and identify the problems that exist in these communities. And you know, we can be a much better city than this. And this is just a small drop in the bucket of what really exists out in the communities. And I have a community that I represent that is just plagued with this type of structures and this type of problem. And, you know, at least we are now beginning to look at it and try to identify some solutions to it. So I hope the council takes this very serious, and we all work together to try to create a much better and beautiful landscape for our communities. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah, Pete.
I'd like to ask that you bring back something that, first of all, would include a more proactive code enforcement. I think that's an essential piece of it, just more proactive code enforcement to get away from the purely complaint-driven code enforcement that we have now on this problem. Secondly, I think that it needs to include some disincentives for letting this property go this way. The registration system, something that is a disincentive to let this happen. The Wall Court is kind of an unusual, well, not kind of, it's a very unique piece of property in Oklahoma City in that it is highly redevelopable, has had lots and lots of interest over the last 20 years. And in fact, I've represented two different groups that wanted to buy the property. And there's an absolute wall between a reasonable reuse of the property and the current ownership. They're just not interested. They're not going to do anything with it. And to some extent, that's their privilege when you get to this personal property rights. But your rights to use your property as you see fit seem to me have to be curtailed at the point where the way you use your property harms other people. And I think this is the perfect example of a disuse of a property causing problems for others that are around them. The other thing, I think you have to balance all of this with not going too far so that we wind up with an ordinance or a series of ordinance or legislative changes that would permit us to tear down structures that have economic value. I think there's always a concern that the housing stock that's being torn down perhaps should not be torn down just because of neglect. It has to have some other element into it that makes it that. But I'd like very much to see you come back. I think we all have areas where this is important to us, and I'd like to see you come back with a broadly based recommendation to try to address some of these, because all these issues aren't addressable by just enhanced code enforcement or fines, or it's going to take a comprehensive program, I think, to do that.
It's complex, and your point about the impact on adjacent property values is kind of the foundation of the discussion here. I mean, this is about protecting property values, and it's the property values who are being negatively impacted by these properties. The other sort of major factor I would add in there, that it's also ensuring full cost recovery, because at this point in time, a lot of these properties are actually being subsidized by the people who are playing by the rules and who occupy their house and keep it up. They're the ones paying the extra services required to support these properties.
Well, in many cases, code enforcement itself is an infringement on personal property rights if you choose to look at it in that narrow a view. But it seems to me that at some point in time, as I said once already, that the exercise of your own personal rights have to be limited by the impact they have on other people.
Larry, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I commend you, Russell, and your staff for what you've done. This has been an area. Skip talked about how he's been interested in this since coming on the council. I guess everybody knows I own Northwest 10th Street with the big red dot out there. We've been looking at this. There's been a lot of discussion going on. I want to thank Kenny and his legal staff for the research they've done. As you go forward on your study, one of the details that I'd like you to include in there is how do we handle or address the absentee owner problem, because that's one of the things that has stood in our way of trying to get the attention of the multifamily housing people along Northwest 10th Street. None of them are residents of Oklahoma City, and as a result, getting a hold of them has been a real challenge for Charles Locke and his people. We, for example, came up with in Arizona where they force you to have a local person responsible for registering your property, and that's the local contact where you can go to and get your hands on them, if you will, and say, hey, you got to fix this up. But what Arizona also has, which many people don't know, is a whole court system just to handle this type of thing. So this thing is the tip of an iceberg that involves both legal, enforcement, and planning, and a comprehensive approach to try to address it, both for the single family and multifamily. I would wholeheartedly endorse and see if we can't wrestle this bear to the ground, so to speak. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
I commend you too, Russell. I think you're picking up on points that all of us have been raising, and I want to just ask this with regards to an inventory of these properties, 16,000 units. And this is all derived from the Postal Service?
That number
Captured?
is, yes. It could be more or less than that, but
Is there a way through internships that you use so well in your department to really get us an inventory of these properties that we can bank on?
well, that was the next step. We would work with the county and utilities and other entities to be able to get a more precise number. That is one option. So
we'll be
you
able
can
to-
act on the information that we have in terms of setting up systems to address it in a sort of generic sense, but to be able to get that nexus in terms of cost, we're really going to have to get more specifics on the wheres of and the hows of these properties.
Okay, appreciate it.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, Meg?
Just a quick one. Russell, the work is fantastic. Larry, you said you had a red dot in your ward. My entire ward was red and orange. A problem. And I really appreciate the attention to this. We're going to have to do something a little bit more dramatic than just complaint-driven code enforcement and all. So I'm 100% behind you and really appreciate the attention to the neighborhoods.
Okay.
And Mayor, I would like to at least put this out for discussion at a later date, that as Russell and his staff continues to address these issues and try to come up with solutions, and our legal department, that maybe you could appoint a task force to address, some of the concerns all over the city and bring in those individuals who are property owners and get their input, and also to make sure that, as it relates to state legislation, that everything is in compliance and not a preemption in reference to the Oklahoma state statutes. And I think this would probably be, a good time to at least start talking about that.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Russell? Jim?
That's all this morning, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. We have no executive session. By ready to adjourn? All right. We're adjourned.